Recently, I was dog sitting for my friend who has 2 Chihuahuas and a big old pit bull, and I was alone. My girlfriend wasn't there. It was just me and these dogs. And I said, I'm never in my life probably ever going to watch K-pop Demon Hunters, and my girlfriend would probably make fun of me if I watched it at home. So I'm going to sit my ass down and listen.
Okay, it is good. Like I had a little kid, right? And I see this pop up on Netflix, when this first came out, and I was like, that has to be the worst. That has to be the worst thing ever. And and then I saw on my shoulder, I'm like, they're demon. This is kind of clever. Like, what's going on? And I was like begging my kid to watch it again because I didn't really watch it the first time.
Sure.
And he was like, I'm kind of done with it. It's a little too scary for me. And I'm like, I can't really justify watching it on my own as an adult.
The only evil part of it is the Saja Boys song, the Soda Pop.
It's
like
clever.
those things, that song got stuck in My Little Soda Pop.
It's stuck.
It's really bad.
Yeah, I promised on one of the other shows I did on KUOW a while ago I would not sing from K-pop Demon Hunters, and now I am breaking that rule. So maybe it's time.
Maybe it's time for Sound Politics. You're listening to Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone. Libby is out this week, but today I am joined by Melissa Santos of Axios Seattle.
Hello, Sound Politics fans.
Fans.
I assume we have fans. I assume there's fans.
Fans, listeners, haters. We have them all. And Melissa, I love having you on the show.
I love coming.
We did try to get Governor Bob Ferguson today. In fact, we have tried so many times to get the governor on the show, and since he's been in office, and we are not the only media outlets who have tried, again and again, and been unable to book him. The reason I bring this up is because our governor seems to want to have tight control over the flow of information to the media and thus to the public, and that's why you're here. You published a story this week about Governor Ferguson strangling. I don't know, is strangling the right word? Bottlenecking?
Certainly, yeah. His office's rules do that.
Yeah. He basically really limiting how our state government agencies talk to us about, us the public, us the reporters, about everything from measles outbreaks to bridge repairs to vaccines. I think it honestly brings into question for a governor who says he wants to make government work better for Washingtonians, whether or not that is happening. So we're going to talk about that on the show today. We're going to talk about how Ferguson himself has been less accessible than at least from our perspective as journalists, than he was as Attorney General, than his predecessors as governor. All of that today on Sound Politics after a quick break. And we're back with Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone. I'm here with Melissa Santos. Okay, so Melissa, when Governor Ferguson took office in 2025, I started to notice something weird. I think you did too.
So many weird things, but continue.
A few weird things, but specifically this. I wanted to talk to the governor's policy people in D.C. about what they were watching as President Trump took office. I could not get a word out of them. Other reporters at KUOW and other agencies told me that requests for simple information was suddenly, after Ferguson took office, taking a long time. It just seemed like every state agency was a lot less accessible. And I should note here that we did reach out to the governor's office to talk to them about everything we're talking about today and this whole episode and get Ferguson's side of the story. We reached out to the governor's office. You also reached out. You talked to them a little bit.
Talked more. They shot emails at me, or an email at me.
That's kind of their preferred thing. I mean, we have been trying to get the governor on this show for over a year. Even tried to get him on this week with no luck. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about your story. So you're reporting this week, Melissa, in Axios, shed light on how Governor Bob Ferguson has exerted an unusual amount of control over the way every single state agency in Washington that he oversees, from like the Department of Ecology to state prisons to Indian Affairs to Washington State Patrol, communicates with the public. What did you find Ferguson changed when he took office?
Well, so initially he was requesting more like a heads up, things like that. What really changed was in
July. Which is
July.
kind of typical, right?
That's a little more typical. I think it was more controlled. Like we noticed some differences around January. But what really changed was July. It wasn't just, hey, send us your media releases, your press releases so we can take a look. and proceed or, offer feedback or whatever. It was they need to get approved through us. Anything you send out, like a press release from an agency, and we're talking dozens of agencies, needs to get approved by us. You send an email to a reporter, it has to be approved by us. They send a question back, you want to send something back, that has to go through us too.
Yeah.
And so that's like a different level. It's not just like, hey, for awareness, send us your press releases so we know what's going on.
Right.
We can flag anything that's weird to us. It's you need to get express approval before you send stuff out or even pick up the phone and talk to a reporter and do an interview.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always found that state agencies before Ferguson came along, were pretty accessible if you wanted, depending on the agency, right? Some of them, like the Department of Social and Health Services, is not as accessible. Other ones, like the Department of Commerce, were super accessible. You could call a spokesperson, get an answer pretty quick.
Or even people who aren't comms people, like who are like, the experts that you might want to talk to directly, which is like off the table now, I think.
Yeah, I want to ask you then, like this is like what you're listening to right now, listener, is like kind of curmudgeonly reporters complaining about the governor's or the state government's eccentricities. We do that a lot. We are curmudgeons, right?
We like to complain. It's true.
I want to ask you, Melissa, why should non-reporters care about this? Like, why are government workflows, comms workflows, important for the public to know about?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I actually hesitated to write a story about this, because at first I'm like, no one cares about us. They were like, ooh, boo-hoo reporters, right? However, I started to hear that agency officials were really unable to do work. Things were log jammed and blocked because, you'd have a communication shop of many people, more than the number of reporters that cover the Capitol at some of these agencies, that are like gathering information from their experts to try to get to the public about like where you can find the COVID vaccine now and things like that. And it's getting log jammed or not getting out in the timeline they want to people, not to us, but to people in the public.
Right.
Because it's going to the governor's office and they're sitting on it, or they don't get a reply back, or they want some small edit that delays it for a long time. And then it's not just that. It's like the Department of Health produced a map of measles exposures. I keep calling it flu, but measles is very serious, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted to get that out and literally sent an email to the governor's office communication staff saying, hey, this has a public health alert, so we want to get this out by like noon. And the governor's office was like, can we add a sentence here? And got back to them. And then it ended up going out not super late, but like an hour plus later than the health officials had wanted.
Yeah.
And this is just an example of, how things get held up. And it's not just about getting back to reporters, it's getting information to the public, sometimes through reporters, but just getting info out.
It's not just the governor's office, right? Like you wrote about one state epidemiologist having his talking points reviewed by the governor before an interview about bird flu.
So that's what you have to wonder. It's like, Governor, are you more of an expert on bird flu than the state epidemiologist who's like a UW guy who like is the state disease guy who's a doctor?
Right.
So that did raise flags for me saying, well, what would the governor be adding exactly to that,
What do you think are the potential impacts here of this, like, I mean, I don't know, is it fair to call it micromanaging, where the governor's office and the governor himself has to review a lot of stuff? I mean, there were some people with complaints that worked for the state that you found emails where, like you said, they were saying, we just can't get any work done. Yeah,
so that's a problem, I think, just for, if you have a bunch of people that the state is paying money to who can't do their jobs. I don't think that should make anyone super happy who cares about government running well. But yeah, I mean, they can't do their jobs, which is to get information to people who may need to know about like a bridge that may or may not be repaired in the near future. And when will that bridge be repaired? And hey, there's going to be a road closure over here. It's really also inconsistent and caused a lot of confusion because the governor's office doesn't seem to like to put things in writing, which made this harder to report. They didn't just send out a memo or directive that's written saying how this works. So you'll see, even in some of the emails attached to my story, like back and forth saying, well, they say they want to see everything. Originally, I guess things that were like road closures for emergency reasons, it was like, no, we don't have to see that. But now it seems like we do. The governor seems really interested in like the I-5 construction. So I guess we have to send that over. So it's really expansive.
Yeah.
More so than I think the governor's office would like to admit.
That everything is going through him. And that is the really weird thing, is like his predecessors, or at least staff for 3 governors previously, Inslee, Christine Gregoire, and Gary Locke said they did not have anything like this as far as policies go.
No, I mean, I think that it'd be fair to say all those administrations had like a no surprises rule. Like they would expect comms officials to communications people who are working in that arena to kind of be like, oh, this could be a little sticky. Let's let the governor's office know, but not sending things over for pre-approval,
Yeah, it's this way in which you kind of like, it seems like Governor Ferguson is grasping the entire state's megaphone like very tightly, or collecting. I don't know what's the metaphor here. Collecting a bunch of megaphones.
Well, it's interesting because I actually didn't have in my story. I was like, gosh, how many agencies exactly are under the governor's cabinet? It's a lot. And his spokesperson Brianna Aho got back to me saying there's dozens of agencies and they all need to talk to us in the governor's office. I was like, that's a lot of agencies, yo. I just put that in my story because it was like, well, dozens is kind of a lot for one small communications shop and or the governor himself to be vetting everything they send out.
You just mentioned Governor Ferguson's spokesperson. Did he or his spokesperson have anything to say in response to your story when you brought up all these issues?
They did not respond to some of the questions I asked. And that's the other thing about when you do things via email and never make yourself available, you can just avoid questions, right? So they said change is hard and different administrations do things different ways. I probably should use the direct quote here because it actually was arguably kind of dismissive.
You have printed out
I have printed out a copy because I do not want to misquote the governor's staff and then have them mad about that.
Yeah.
But so we have dozens of agencies. They need to be communicating with each other and the governor's office. And a new administration has different ways of doing things. Change that comes with new administrations is sometimes hard for individuals. People are used to doing things a certain way, and change can be hard. That is what they said in response to my questions. And I put a lot of that in my story because I was like, wow, I thought they might say, we've heard some concerns and we're looking at those. Or, we're always evaluating ways to do better. Nope. Change can be hard. This is good. That's what they said.
I'm like, you can hear me sort of, I don't know, making smirk sounds. It's at your tone. I should just say, I
just thought it was more dismissive than I thought. I'm going to be honest. I did not expect that response.
Well, especially when you have, government officials complaining that they can't do any work because of this laborious bottleneck in the system. Ferguson made the promise when he took office that he was going to reform government, not defend it. We've all heard that, that he wanted to make the government work better. I think he has been dealt a really tough hand by the economy. I mean, how his predecessors and his party have run the government for a long time, right? There's, been decades of growth without planning for this inevitability of giant deficits. So he got dealt a rough hand and has had to do huge cuts. I think, I'm curious, do you think this tendency to clam up is to hide the fact that things are less than perfect? Like one of these gag orders that you mentioned in your story was telling bureaucrats not to talk about cuts to state food stamp programs.
To be fair, I didn't find a bunch of examples of that in writing, but certainly the effect is we can't ask questions about things. And this particular example said a Department of Health staffer was saying we were directed not to take any interviews or schedule any interviews about women, infant, and children's food aid funding, just to avoid having to answer questions about why there's no backup funding in the state budget. This is when the federal government was shutting down, right? Yeah. And I don't know if you remember that time. I remember reaching out, trying to get answers about like what is happening to people who need food. These are things that do affect people. Again, not just us. How long can we keep giving them money if the government shuts down at the federal level? These are things that if I was on WIC, I would probably want to know, like, is it
WIC
2 weeks?
Is the food stamp program.
Yeah, the Women, Infant, and Children programs. The acronym is WIC. And I would want to know if I was on that program if I had like 2 weeks of guaranteed benefits or not. And so these are things we were asking, and they specifically were saying, do not take calls on this.
So state agencies have been told not to talk to the media, which maybe wouldn't be a problem if Ferguson himself were more accessible, but Ferguson has been less accessible personally than previous governors. And this is the other thing that I want to talk to you about. I have been really frustrated with the governor's inability. I mean, again, we've tried to get him on this show many times, but it's not just us. Ferguson is the first governor this century to not do weekly media availabilities for the press. I talked to State House reporter veteran David Ammons, who covered governors going back more than 50 years. He told me only 2 governors that he can remember didn't have a regular like Ask Me Anything event with the press. And they were both one-termers. It was Dixie Lee Ray in the 70s and Mike Lowry in the 90s, who stopped after he was embroiled, in a sexual harassment scandal. Those two one-term governors, and now Ferguson. Ferguson will sometimes agree to do, obviously, short phone interviews or Zoom calls on certain subjects.
Or sit down and watch a movie with the Seattle Times,
Or he sat down and watched one battle after another, which is a 2.5-hour movie with a reporter.
I would have been like,
Times.
hey Bob, what about the WIC program? You know what I mean?
That's the thing, is like, it's sort of about subjects that he wants to talk about. He often wants to talk about President Trump or ICE. He doesn't agree to interviews on subjects that are less, favorable. And sometimes you can get him to answer a few questions after a press conference, or you can catch him in the halls of Olympia. But he especially has not done like sit down, unstructured talks like we do on podcasts, where like any topic is on the table. I've been talking to a lot of other reporters who cover Olympia. None of us seem to be able to get him to sit down.
Well, and I actually went back. Actually, I was coming over here, and I took a little extra time to look through a lot of TVW records, just going back, looking through. And I'll just say that Jay Inslee had 6 media availabilities with the press in just the month of June 2013.
Wow. And that was his first year in office.
That was his first year in office. However, I mean, there was a looming government shutdown potentially. There was a lot of legislative stuff happening. I don't know if we'd see that, though, from Ferguson. If the same things were happening and, are we going to have a budget before the end of the state fiscal year? If that was happening, I don't know that he'd meet with the press 6 times, with most of those being open-ended, just like, let's talk about the session, what's going on,
Yeah, exactly. This thing where it's like, I might have an agenda here, but I'm happy to hear any questions you have. And it's not just those like big media availabilities, which Ferguson does incredibly rarely. It's also just what we talked about. I mean, he hasn't come on KUOW for a sit-down interview. He hasn't done TVWs inside Olympia, which previous governors would usually come on about once a year. I emailed the VP of programming at TVW to ask, have you been trying to get an interview with him? And they said they had a standing invite out to him, but he's still trying to find time in his schedule. I mean, we're coming up on 500 days here. Why has he not sat down with anyone yet?
I've been trying to figure this out a little. I mean, I will say I think he did do short interviews at the start of his term with King 5 and the Seattle Times.
Sure, yes.
I've heard that he only cares about King 5 and the Seattle Times, and I'm like, whatever, Bob. There's a new media ecosystem, okay, Bob?
And we should be very clear here. The Seattle Times interview was before he took office.
Yeah.
The King 5 interview, I think you're referring to, was after he took office, and it was, as far as I can tell, 12 minutes long.
Right. So this is the key difference, because I was at a lot of those press conferences from 2013 to 2019, 2020 with Inslee, for instance. It would be a half hour of essentially like 40 seconds of Inslee remarks and then us just asking questions. That actually has not happened a single time with Bob Ferguson. I really thought that he'd maybe done 1 or 2. I went back and looked, and no, he has not. The only thing that could be considered that is maybe the beginning of session. There's a legislative preview where there's a lot of people talking, lots of stuff going on, and he did submit to some questions there.
Right.
And then at the end of session, not both years he's been in office. One of them, he did do quote, sine die, end of session press conference. That was short. It was short.
It was like 15 minutes.
And here's the deal. When
minutes.
There's a breaking news event that you're covering as a reporter at something like that, you need to get the questions asked about that first sometimes. And then you'd like to be able to ask some other stuff, but Bob's not leaving time for that.
Yeah.
He's scheduling these press conferences about something he wants to talk about, like the detention center this week, and then having time for like 2 or 3 questions, which probably are going to be about that, so people can get their stories done that day. Not about like, hey, Bob, why don't you ever like actually talk to us about anything? Like, did not take questions on that on a Tuesday.
Yeah. We thought maybe he was going to come on the episode, today, and just like every other time we've asked in the last 15 months, there's a sort of signaling from his office that he might be willing to do it, but when you actually try to nail him down to a time, he's nowhere to be found. And that has not just been my experience, but, like we talked about across the.
And the problem there isn't just us like, oh, we want to fill time on the air, or me like getting a quote for the story. This is a way people hear from the governor and hear his voice.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm concerned about. I don't know what the governor's saying. I don't know how many people wordsmith. There's like 6 people in that office who can wordsmith statements from the governor. If everything's being sent by email, you don't even know if if those are his words. Apparently, he actually is editing a lot of this stuff. So maybe they are his words, but how would you know?
Yeah.
You don't know. When I asked the Department of Health, hey, how are you doing with this policy or whatever? Actually, I didn't ask them that, but they volunteered a statement this week saying that they're in a better place than they used to be. And I'm like, I think that's from the governor's office, and I don't think I can use that.
You think that the governor came to them and said, can you tell Melissa you like this more?
Okay, so here's the deal. I asked them to confirm like 2 small facts. Was it Scott Lindquist, the state epidemiologist who was doing this Politico interview on bird flu that the governor was like,
sure.
know, like small facts. And they came back with an unsolicited statement about like, there was an adjustment period and now we're more aligned than we used to be. And I'm like, I don't think you guys wrote that because I'm sure you sent over my questions to the governor's office. And then now I don't think I can use that. It would be disingenuous. I don't think that's from you.
I think the point that you're making here is a good one because you don't get the personality of the governor in an email statement. And if you can't really sit down with him to have like a meaty discussion, it's hard to get to know him. And he is kind of a hard to read guy. We have talked before a lot on this podcast just about like, why is he doing this? Why is he doing that when it comes to the millionaire's tax, when it comes to tax hikes, especially when it comes to just his philosophy of how to govern and what he believes in. When we talk about Governor Inslee, we know, that Governor Inslee was a guy who really believed in, climate policy, green energy. Did he do a good job at that? There's a lot of, arguments that our state has not necessarily made all the progress that he wanted us to make or he said we were making. But we know what he cared about or what he said he cared about. It's hard to tell with Governor Ferguson. When you ask him, he often focuses on what works. Like, I care about what works, And that does not seem to be, his policy, at least here, does not seem to be working efficiently. What I see when I read your story is things piling up for weeks unanswered.
And we should say that this is not just, I mentioned the 1 hour delay with the measles.
Oh, my gosh.
That's only 1 hour.
That's small.
But like there are inquiries that had never been answered. One staffer was saying they were waiting for more than 6 weeks to figure out if they could do an interview with KUOW. That's like a long turnaround. It's not just a minor inconvenience. And this was asking about the big, beautiful bill or whatever. This was about federal spending bill. Again, things that could really be affecting Washington State. Now that I'm looking through this, it makes it clearer to me why I was having trouble sorting through some of the effects of that spending stuff at the federal level and how it would affect us because they were not sending out information about it. They were not talking about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know if they're trying to get all their ducks in a row. I guess that is what they're doing over there. But now it seems like specifically I'm throwing up my hands, like I'm doing gestures because I cannot explain why this is happening and how it benefits anyone. And here's my fundamental thing. I do not believe that if you are a governor of Washington State, you have time to be wordsmithing press releases about road construction. I do not think that if you are going to say put out a budget in the normal timeline, which would be say not 2 days before Christmas or a day and a half before Christmas, and do things like that you have time for this, The governor did put out his budget real late this year. I didn't write a story because who cares? But like, it's an example of just like, the delegation is not happening that should be happening over there.
I guess that, to finish up this discussion, I finally, today, knowing that we were going to tape, asked the governor's spokesperson, is the governor unwilling to sit down for Sound Politics or Inside Olympia or these like meatier discussions? Why is Governor Ferguson the only governor in recent memory, and as far as I can tell, the only high-profile elected official in the state other than Republican Representative Dan Newhouse, who interacts this way with the press? And, listeners, we will let you know what the governor says. I still have the invite for him to come on the show, like I've asked many, many times. So it's possible that after this, he will talk to us. I don't know. Maybe I'm being really optimistic. You're waggling your
Bob
finger
is not going to change. I've decided this. In fact, I think some people reached out to me because I said this a year ago on a different podcast somewhere. Criticism is not going to change Bob because he thinks this works for him. He's gotten to be governor of Washington State operating like this, and he thinks he knows how to write a press release better than communications professionals who've been doing it a long time, or at least he has better ideas in a lot of cases. And he thinks that he has good feedback to offer on talking points for experts who are doing interviews on their expertise that they trained for years, So he's not going to change because we complain or a few bad stories are written about him. He's just not.
Melissa Santos, people can read you if they subscribe to Axios' Seattle newsletter, and we're going to throw a link to your story in the show notes. I encourage everyone to read it. It has a lot more stuff in it that is like really pertinent to how communication travels from the government to the people of Washington State. But thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks so much.
Hey, all. After we taped this interview with Melissa Santos, the governor's spokesperson sent me an email that I just wanted to read from because we really do want to get the governor's side of the story and are hopeful that, he will come on Sound Politics at some point, or I don't know, some other long form, really any other long form podcast or interview format where we can get into the big meaty questions. But here's what his spokesperson, Brianna Aho, said in an email. Hi, Scott. The governor is regularly available publicly. He hosts and attends media events where he takes questions and speaks at many public events where he is almost always available for questions for reporters who show up on whatever topic they would like to ask about. The governor takes questions on other topics at most press conferences and almost always takes extra time after the formal event to talk with reporters who attend. And then she pointed out that he did do a little less than 30-minute legislative preview this year, and that while he hasn't sat down for the longer Inside Olympia on TVW, he did do an 11-minute and 46-second sit down with the Impact. Now, she did not say the specific times in her email. I'm just saying that for context. She didn't answer my questions about why he hasn't sat down or if he plans to sit down for meatier, longer discussions. But I just wanted to give that bit of perspective from the governor's office. And Governor Ferguson, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on this show. So looking forward to talking to you more in the future. That is all for Sound Politics this week. I'm Scott Greenstone. Our show is edited by Kat Smith. It's produced by Hans Anderson. And if you like what we're doing, you appreciate us trying to hold governors and legislators and Democrats and Republicans and independents and socialists and whoever else accountable, if you appreciate that, please feel free to jump online to kuow.org/politics and throw us a donation. That's kuow.org/politics. And we'll see you next week.